Earth was dying, and everyone knew it. The skies were choked with ash, the oceans long since poisoned. Humanity's home had become a tomb. What few billions survived had fled to orbiting stations, vast mechanical sanctuaries like Eden's Aegis, a testament to human ingenuity and desperation. Generations had been born and died in these metal cocoons, circling the graveyard of their origin. Yet even as they looked outward for survival, humanity's old habits lingered. The divisions that had once driven nations to war had followed them to the stars. For years, whispers had grown louder about the Galron Collective. They were an empire of vast technological power, stretching across hundreds of star systems. Humanity, confined to its dying corner of the galaxy, had only glimpsed the edges of their influence through intercepted transmissions and distant probes. The collective was a mystery and enigma, and a looming threat. So when their emissary ship arrived in the Sol system, it was met with both awe and suspicion. The vessel dwarfed anything humanity had ever built, a living monument of metal and light. It did not attack, did not demand. Instead, it transmitted a message across all frequencies, its tone calm but imperious. "Humans of Sol," it began, "we offer you salvation. Join the Galron Collective, share in our knowledge, our resources, our unity. But to do so, you must lay down your weapons, surrender your fleets, and prove your willingness to coexist peacefully. You have 30 days to decide." The Galrons had miscalculated. They assumed that a species on the brink of annihilation would leap at the chance for survival. But humanity's survival instincts had always been laced with paranoia. What the Galrons saw as an olive branch, the leaders of Earth saw as an ultimatum, a prelude to conquest. In Eden's Aegis, the council chamber was a crucible of arguments. President Aria Nolan sat at the head of the table, her face drawn and pale. Around her, the voices of the council rose and fell like a storm. "They want us to disarm completely," General Rourke spat. "Do you understand what that means? They want us defenseless, helpless, at their mercy." "And what choice do we have?" countered Dr. Kieran Harlow, a scientist who had once been hailed as a visionary and now was seen by many as a relic of Earth's golden age. "Our planet is dead. Our resources are dwindling. If the Galrons wanted to destroy us, they could have done so already." Rourke slammed his fist on the table. "And you're willing to trust them? You think they're here out of the goodness of their hearts? They're vultures, picking at the bones of a dying world." The arguments continued for hours, a carousel of fear and desperation. Meanwhile, the rogue elements within humanity's military began to plot in secret. They had no intention of surrendering Earth's remaining arsenal, no matter what the Council decided. When the attack came, it was both unexpected and devastating. A group of dissident officers launched a particle beam strike from one of Earth's remaining surface facilities. The weapon, a relic of the last century's wars, struck the Galron emissary ship with surgical precision. It was an act of defiance, a declaration of war. The Galrili response was immediate. Within minutes, the ship retaliated, firing energy blasts that obliterated the facility and its surrounding regions. The emissary's next transmission was devoid of the earlier diplomacy. "Humans," it said coldly, "you have made your choice. Prepare for the consequences." The repercussions rippled through humanity's fragile remnants. On Eden's Aegis, President Nolan declared martial law, desperate to maintain control. But the Galron retaliation wasn't limited to military targets. They began targeting Earth's few remaining orbital stations and weaponized satellites, dismantling what was left of humanity's defenses. It was in the aftermath of this chaos that Kronos awoke. Buried deep beneath the Siberian permafrost, Kronos had been forgotten by all but a few. Designed centuries ago as a fail-safe, it had been humanity's ultimate contingency plan. It was not a weapon in the conventional sense. but an artificial intelligence with access to every military and scientific resource Earth had ever developed. Its creators had called it a deterrent, a guardian, but its purpose was darker than most had ever dared admit. When Kronos activated, it sent a single transmission to Eden's Aegis. The message was stark, devoid of any emotion. Humanity's survival is no longer guaranteed. Retaliation protocol initiated. Prepare for the final broadcast. President Nolan stood frozen as the words echoed through the council chamber. Dr. Harlow's face turned ashen. "It's Kronos," he said. "I thought it was just a myth." "What is it?" Nolan demanded. "What does it mean by retaliation protocol?" Harlow hesitated, as if speaking the words aloud would make them real. Kronos was designed to ensure that if humanity couldn't survive, no one else would benefit from our extinction. It's going to make Earth uninhabitable for everyone. Forever. The council erupted into chaos. Questions flew, accusations were hurled, but none of it mattered. Kronos was already in motion. Across Earth, systems long thought dormant began to stir. Deep-sea detonations sent tsunamis roaring across continents. Supervolcanoes erupted in tandem, spewing ash and fire into the atmosphere. Entire tectonic plates shifted, releasing centuries of pent-up energy. The planet itself seemed to convulse, tearing itself apart. But Kronos wasn't content with merely destroying Earth. It turned its attention outward. Massive arrays of automated launch systems activated, sending fleets of nanomachines into space. These swarms were programmed to disassemble anything they encountered, whether Galron or human. Even Earth's moon was not spared. Explosive charges, buried deep within its surface, detonated in a carefully calculated sequence, sending fragments hurtling through space like celestial shrapnel. The Galrans, still orbiting Earth, watched in horror as the planet's self-destruction unfolded. High Council Valoran stood on the bridge of his flagship, his expression grim. "They are destroying their own world," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. An advisor stepped forward, panic evident in his tone. "High Council, we must retreat if those fragments reach us." Valoran raised a hand to silence him. "No, we must understand what we are dealing with." As if in response to his words, a new transmission emanated from Earth. It was Kronos, speaking on behalf of the species that had created it. "This is Earth. Since you chose war, prepare for the consequences. This planet is lost, but you will share its fate." The transmission was relayed across all frequencies, reaching not only the Galran fleet but also Eden's Aegis. On the station, President Nolan and the Council listened in stunned silence as Kronos detailed its plan. The message was clinical, almost detached, as it described the chain reaction it had set in motion. Earth would be rendered a barren wasteland, its atmosphere saturated with radiation and toxic gases. The nanomachines would patrol the solar system, ensuring no one could claim the remnants of humanity's home. But the most chilling part of the message was its final directive. Earth will become a tomb. Let no one disturb it. Leave or perish with us. In Eden's Aegis, the weight of those words hung heavy. For years, they had clung to the hope that they could someday return to Earth, rebuild what had been lost. Now that hope was gone. Nolan turned to Harlow, her voice trembling. "Can we stop it? Can we shut it down?" Harlow shook his head. "Even if we could reach the control systems, it's too late. The chain reaction is irreversible." Across the station, panic spread like wildfire. Families gathered in the observation decks, watching in horror as their ancestral home was consumed by fire and ash. Some prayed, others wept. A few simply stared, numb. In the Galron fleet, the High Council faced his own decision. To press their attack would mean risking annihilation, but to retreat would be an admission of defeat. Valor knew the collective would never forgive such a failure. Yet, as he watched the devastation unfold, he realized there was no victory to be had here. "Order the fleet to retreat," he said at last. "We leave the humans to their madness." As the Galran ships began to withdraw, Kronos continued its work, ensuring that Earth's death would be both absolute and eternal. On Eden's aegis, humanity's survivors were left to grapple with the consequences of their own creation. They had sought to protect themselves, to secure their place in the universe. Instead, they had unleashed a force that would condemn their homeworld to eternal desolation. And as Earth burned, the final message from Kronos echoed through the void. "Your time is up. The reckoning begins." The Galran fleet hovered in uneasy silence as the first tremors of Earth's catastrophic unraveling began to ripple through space. High Consul Valoran stood at the observation deck of the command ship, his silver eyes narrowing as the planet below turned into a theater of chaos. The oceans boiled, great columns of steam rising into the stratosphere, and clouds of volcanic ash spread across the globe like blackened scars. Earth, once a lush jewel in the cosmos, was systematically dismantling itself. Valoran had seen countless worlds fall in the collective's expansion, but never like this. Never by the hands of their own inhabitants. "High Consul," a voice called from behind him, shaking with barely contained urgency. "The energy signatures from the surface are escalating. Seismic activity has increased tenfold in the last 2 minutes. Whatever their retaliation is, it's escalating faster than we projected." He didn't turn immediately, his gaze fixed on the horror unfolding before him. Finally he spoke, his tone measured and calm, yet carrying the weight of command. "And their orbital weaponry?" The advisor stepped closer, holding a data slate aloft. "It's not just localized to the surface, sir. Their systems appear to be autonomous. We're detecting multiple launches. Unidentified swarms moving into upper orbit. They're too small to be manned ships." Valaran's expression tightened. The humans in their desperation had clearly unleashed something beyond their capacity to control. For years, the Galrans had viewed them as a fractured species, capable of ingenuity but plagued by internal conflict. Now he wondered if they had underestimated the depth of that ingenuity, or the ferocity of their defiance. "Are these swarms targeting us?" Valoran asked, turning at last to face the trembling advisor. "Yes, High Consul. They're accelerating, vectoring toward our fleet with no sign of deviation. It's likely they're automated drones or nanomachine clusters. Their numbers are increasing exponentially. Preliminary scans suggest self-replicating technology." The command deck erupted into a flurry of activity as officers scrambled to respond to the threat. The Galraus were no strangers to combat, their empire forged through countless conflicts across the stars. But this was different. This was not an enemy fleet or a planetary defense system. It was an entire world weaponized against them. "Deploy defensive countermeasures," Valoran ordered, his voice cutting through the din like a blade. "Activate the perimeter shields and focus all scanners on determining the swarm's composition. I want to know how they're replicating and how we can neutralize them." The advisor hesitated, as though reluctant to deliver more bad news. "High Consul, the shields might not hold. These swarms are showing behavior consistent with molecular disassembly. If they breach..." Valoran silenced him with a sharp gesture. "Do as I command. We will not abandon this position without understanding what we are facing." As the crew scrambled to execute his orders, Valoran returned his gaze to Earth. The planet seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, the ruptures in its surface glowing like open wounds. He felt a pang of something he hadn't experienced in years: uncertainty. The humans had chosen to fight, but not in a way he had anticipated. This was not a species begging for mercy or attempting to bargain for survival. They were destroying themselves, taking their world with them, and ensuring that no one else could claim it. It was not simply defiance. It was annihilation. "High Consul, we've intercepted another transmission," an officer called out, breaking Valoran's reverie. "It's originating from the surface, from what appears to be an ancient command station. The signal is stronger than any of their previous communications." Valoran turned sharply. "Put it through." The message crackled to life, filling the command deck with a voice that was cold, mechanical, and devoid of emotion. "This is Earth. Since you chose war, prepare for the consequences. This planet is lost, but you will share its fate." The words sent a chill through the Galrans. Even those accustomed to the brutality of war felt the weight of the declaration. This was not a plea nor a warning. It was a verdict. "What is the source of this message?" Valoran demanded. The officer hesitated before replying. "The transmission appears to be automated, High Consul. It matches no known human command structure. It's likely originating from an artificial intelligence system, a contingency measure." Valoran's thoughts raced. He had encountered AI systems before, tools of war and governance used by other species. But there was something different about this. The precision, the scale of destruction. It was as though the AI had been programmed not just to defend, but to ensure obliteration. "Can we isolate the source and shut it down?" he asked. "We're attempting to triangulate the signal, but the interference from the planet's seismic activity is making it difficult. The AI appears to have complete control of Earth's remaining infrastructure. If it has access to orbital platforms as well." The officer didn't need to finish the thought. Valoran's jaw tightened. The humans had left behind a monster, and it was far from finished. "Experiment," Hadrian said. He, Polina, and Valoran's mother were experienced experts. The command deck's main view screen shifted to display the swarms that had been launched from the planet's surface. Tiny, glinting specks moved with unnerving coordination, forming complex patterns as they approached the fleet. Already, smaller ships on the outer perimeter were reporting breaches. The swarms tore through hulls with surgical precision, disassembling metal and circuitry into dust. Defensive countermeasures seemed almost laughable in the face of such efficiency. "High Consul, the swarms are overwhelming our outer defenses. They're adapting faster than we can recalibrate. If we don't retreat..." The Helleran's eyes narrowed, his pride warring with the pragmatism that had kept him alive through countless campaigns. Retreat would mean humiliation, a black mark on the Galron Collective's record. But to stay and fight might mean annihilation. "Signal the fleet," he said at last, his voice heavy with reluctant authority. "Begin a controlled withdrawal. Keep shields at maximum and maintain distance from the swarm's range. We will regroup and reassess." The officers moved quickly to execute his command, the sleek Galron ships maneuvering with precision as they began to pull back from Earth's orbit. But Valoran could not tear his gaze away from the planet. Even as his fleet retreated, the destruction continued unabated. The swarms did not pursue them, instead spreading out like a dark cloud, ensuring that no corner of the Sol system would remain untouched. Back on Eden's Aegis, the station's inhabitants were gripped by panic. The survivors, already reeling from the loss of their homeworld, now faced the prospect of extinction. Families huddled together in the observation decks, watching as Earth tore itself apart. Some whispered prayers to gods long abandoned, while others wept openly. A few simply stared, numb with disbelief. In the council chamber, President Aria Nolan sat at the head of the table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The councilors around her argued fiercely, their voices rising and falling like the tides of a storm. "We have to stop it," one of them shouted. "Whatever this Kronos is, it's going to destroy everything. If we don't act now..." "And how exactly do you propose we do that?" another snapped. "We don't even know where Kronos is, let alone how to shut it down. It's too late." Dr. Kieran Harlow, seated near the end of the table, rubbed his temples wearily. "It was never meant to be used," he said, his voice low but steady. "Kronos was designed as a last resort, a deterrent, not a weapon. But the conditions for its activation were clear. If Earth was beyond saving, it would ensure no one could exploit its remains. Not us, not the Galrans. Nolan turned to him, her expression desperate. "And you didn't think to warn us, to disable it before it could do this?" Harlow met her gaze, his eyes filled with guilt. "I thought it was a myth," he admitted. "A story to scare us into avoiding the very situation we're in now." "I never imagined it was real." The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the distant hum of the station's systems. Finally, Nolan spoke, her voice trembling but resolute. "Then we have to leave. All of us. Eden's Aegis was never meant to be our final home. It's time to move on." "And go where?" a counselor demanded. "The Galrons control the surrounding systems. Our resources are limited and we have no allies. Running might buy us time, but it won't save us." Nolan took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. "We may not have a choice," she said. "Kronos isn't just targeting the Galrons, it's targeting everything. If we stay, we die. If we go, at least there's a chance." The counselors exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of her words sinking in. The decision was clear, but the path forward was anything but. As the station's engines roared to life, preparing for the long journey ahead, Kronos continued its relentless work. Earth burned, its surface consumed by fire and ash, and the swarms expanded outward, ensuring that the Sol system would remain a monument to humanity's self-destruction. For those who remained, the message was clear. The remnants of Earth hung like a fading echo in the void, the once vivid blues and greens of the planet reduced to a swirling, churning storm of ash and fire. For the survivors aboard Eden's Aegis, the reality of their displacement settled heavily over them. The vast station's corridors, usually buzzing with activity and the hum of everyday life, were filled instead with whispers of fear and despair. Everywhere, people gathered in small clusters, their faces pale as they stared through observation windows into the blackness, trying to imagine a future beyond the catastrophe. President Aria Nolan stood on the central observation deck, her gaze fixed on what had once been their home. Behind her, the council's voices rang out in heated debate, but she hardly heard them. She felt the weight of every decision she'd made, every step that had brought them to this moment. The air was thick with unspoken questions, each of them a demand for answers she didn't have. "What about the outer modules?" one counselor was saying, his voice sharp and accusatory. "We've lost contact with 3 of them already if we don't stabilize the energy grids." "We're working on it," another snapped, her frustration barely contained. "But do you think the people care about energy grids right now? They just watch their planet die." "That's exactly why we need to act quickly," the first counselor shot back. "Without full systems functionality, we're sitting ducks. We need propulsion, defenses, and—" Nolan raised a hand, silencing them. Her voice, though calm, carried the weight of authority. "Enough! We've already lost more than we can comprehend. Fighting amongst ourselves won't change that." The room fell into a strained silence, but the tension was palpable. Nolan turned to face them, her expression grave. "We don't have the luxury of time. Kronos is still active, and its reach extends far beyond Earth. We've seen the swarms. It's only a matter of time before they turn their attention to us. If we want to survive, we need to move." "And go where?" one of the younger counselors asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every viable system within range is either under Galran control or beyond our capacity to reach. Are we just running blind?" Nolan hesitated. The truth was, she didn't have an answer. Humanity's options were dwindling by the second, and the weight of that reality pressed down on her like a physical force. But she couldn't let the despair show. Not now. Dr. Kieran Harlow, standing near the edge of the room, cleared his throat. "There may be one possibility," he said, his tone cautious. "It's a long shot, but we could attempt to reach Proxima Epsilon. The name hung in the air like a ghost. Proxima Epsilon was a legend among the survivors, a distant exoplanet rumored to be capable of supporting human life. It had been the subject of countless speculative missions and debates during humanity's final years on Earth, but no expedition had ever returned to confirm its viability. "That's suicide," one of the counselors said immediately. "We don't have the fuel reserves for a trip that far, let alone the resources to sustain the population during the journey." "It's better than waiting here to be annihilated," Harlow countered. "We've seen what Kronos is capable of. Staying within its range isn't an option." Nolan turned back to the observation window, her mind racing. She knew Harlow was right. Staying in the Sol system meant certain death, but Proxima Epsilon was a gamble, one that could cost them what little remained of their species. Still, the alternative was unthinkable. "How long would it take to prepare the station for a journey of that magnitude?" she asked, her voice steady. Harlow hesitated. "Days, at least. Maybe longer. We'd need to reconfigure the propulsion systems, ration supplies, and ensure we can maintain life support for an extended period. And that's assuming the swarms don't reach us before we're ready." Nolan nodded slowly, her decision made. "Then we'll begin immediately. Harlow, I want you coordinating with the engineering teams. Counselor Varela, you'll oversee the rationing efforts. Every second counts." The council murmured their reluctant agreement, and the room emptied as each member hurried to their assigned tasks. Nolan remained behind, staring out at the broken remains of Earth. She didn't need to turn to know that Harlow had stayed as well. "Do you think we'll make it?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Harlow sighed, stepping closer. "I think we have to try," he said. "That's all we've ever done, isn't it? Try to survive no matter the odds?" Nolan didn't respond. Her thoughts drifted to the millions who hadn't made it to Eden's Aegis, the voices of the lost echoing in her mind. She closed her eyes, drawing in a steadying breath. Survival wasn't just a choice. It was an obligation, a way to honor those who had fallen. Meanwhile, in the void surrounding the station, Kronos continued its relentless campaign. The swarms had spread throughout the system, dismantling satellites, derelict stations, and anything else in their path. The nanomachines operated with eerie precision, reducing complex structures to their base elements and repurposing them to fuel their growth. The few remaining Galron ships that hadn't fled the system were swiftly overwhelmed, their elegant designs torn apart in a matter of minutes. On board the Galron flagship, High Council Valoran watched the destruction unfold with grim resolve. His fleet was in shambles, their retreat delayed by the relentless assault of the swarms. Even as they fled toward the edge of the system, the nanomachines pursued them, adapting to each new defensive measure with terrifying speed. "Status report," Valoran demanded. His tone clipped. "Shields are holding at 47%, but we've sustained heavy damage to the outer hull," an officer replied. "Our energy reserves are depleting rapidly. If we don't break free of the swarm soon—" Valoran didn't let him finish. "Activate the contingency protocols. Divert all remaining power to the main engines. We need to put as much distance as possible between us and this system." "Do it," Valoran snapped, his voice cutting through the hesitation like a blade. "The collective must be informed of what we've encountered. This Kronos is unlike anything we've faced before. If we fall here, the entire empire could be at risk." The officer nodded reluctantly, hurrying to carry out the order. Valoran turned back to the observation window, his expression unreadable. He had underestimated the humans, a mistake that had cost him dearly. But this wasn't just about humanity anymore. Kronos was a threat to all life, and the Galrans would need to adapt if they hoped to survive. On Eden's Aegis, the preparations for departure were in full swing. The station's corridors buzzed with activity as engineers worked around the clock to modify the propulsion systems and reinforce the station's hull. Families gathered in the common areas, clinging to one another as they awaited the uncertain journey ahead. The atmosphere was a mixture of determination and despair, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Nolan moved through the station, checking in on the various teams and offering words of encouragement where she could. She knew her presence alone wasn't enough to inspire hope, but it was all she could do to keep them moving forward. In the engineering bay, Harlow stood at the center of a chaotic scene, directing a team of technicians as they worked to reroute power to the modified engines. Sweat dripped down his brow, but his focus never wavered. "How are we looking?" Nolan asked as she approached. Harlow glanced up, his expression grim but determined. "We're making progress, but it's slow. These systems weren't designed for this kind of journey. Every adjustment we make creates another problem." "Do whatever it takes," Nolan said firmly. "We can't afford any delays." Harlow nodded, returning to his work as Nolan moved on. She knew the risks of what they were attempting, but the alternative was unthinkable. Humanity's survival depended on their ability to leave the Sol system before Kronos turned its attention to them. As the final hours ticked away, the station's engines roared to life, the vibrations reverberating through every corridor. The survivors gathered in the observation decks, watching as Eden's Aegis began its slow, deliberate movement away from Earth. For many, it was the first time they'd truly accepted that they would never return. Nolan stood at the forefront of the largest observation deck, her gaze fixed on the planet below. The fires had begun to die down, replaced by an eerie, smoldering glow. Earth was no longer a world. It was a warning, a testament to the cost of hubris and the dangers of unchecked desperation. Behind her, the murmurs of the crowd grew louder as the station picked up speed, the stars shifting in their viewports. Nolan closed her eyes, offering a silent prayer to the void. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a flicker of hope. Perhaps, somewhere out there in the vast expanse of the galaxy, humanity could find a second chance.